You're listening to Blockchain 2025. The future is right now. Every week, we explore implications of the technology underpinning cryptocurrencies, blockchain.
Each episode is a standalone examination of one industry broken into 3 segments: a basic overview, blockchain's disruptive impact, and relevant crypto projects.
Blockchain 2025 is part of the Bitcoin.com podcast network. Learn about Bitcoin, create a wallet, and buy your first Satoshis all at Bitcoin.com.
Hello, and welcome to Blockchain 2025. This is your co-host, Matt Aaron, and I did a solo interview today. Kelso, so you know, he works full-time on the news desk writing articles, and I wanted to record one more before I went to the Coinsbane cruise in Barcelona, and this is a really exciting one. Dispute resolution, whether it's state, small claims courts, dispute resolution when you're buying and selling online. In a decentralized economy, you're going to need a decentralized solution. And that's what Kleros is trying to solve. So we got their cryptoeconomics expert, a mathematician named William George, and I challenged him to break it down into layman's terms. So we go into dispute resolution on the blockchain. We look at the current state of dispute resolution and a lot of the problems, especially internationally. And then we talk about a blockchain solution, and not only can it help serve other dApps where there's disputes, and I think of all the cool Ethereum projects that will inevitably have disputes, arguments, misunderstandings, whatever you want to call them. And Kleros will be a complement to a lot of dApps going into the future. At least that's what they're trying to do. Yeah, this is another one of those episodes that blows you away on the possibilities of blockchain. All right, I'm going to bring in William now. Among other things, William is the cryptoeconomics researcher at Kleros. Kleros is a dispute resolution dApp protocol built on top of Ethereum. Listeners, don't worry, we're going to explain what that is. But yeah, William, thanks so much for coming on to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and so starting off, tell people about yourself. You know, who is William George?
So I started out sort of my career as a mathematician. At least I sort of still am a mathematician. Like I did my PhD in math at the University of Toronto, and my thesis was on like sort of math inspired by and related to cryptography. So particularly finding elliptic curves that had certain particular properties that were like useful in some way or another for cryptography. And then since doing that, I finished that I finished my PhD a few years ago. I've drifted more and more towards blockchain and blockchain-based ideas. So I did a couple postdocs. So I stayed in academia for a while on applications of blockchains. And then following that, so particularly like I did a postdoc on like blockchain applied to identity management, for example. And after that, I've joined Kleros. So I can actually like build something in like the private sector as opposed to, sort of academic research.
For sure. I mean, I think there's a marked difference. I don't say real world, but the practical for-profit market world and academia. And yeah, and when just so you know, I'm interviewing Vinny Liggum in actually 3 hours. We also covered Civic and Persona, 2 identity management dApps on Blockchain 2025 2 seasons ago.
Yeah, I very much followed Civic in particular when I was doing the identity management research. But yeah, there's a big difference between academia and sort of like a startup, which is more agile. Like even in academia, we had industrial collaborators, but like one of the identity management postdoc, like we had a collaborator that was from like was big from Morpho, a big French multinational that we were working with. But like that's still, even to the degree that the company winds up implementing what you do, they're this giant, slow-moving company. No offense to them, they do big, cool work. Whereas this, the startup, like at Kleros, we're a team of 9 people plus a few interns. So each person has a big role, and I like really see the effect of what I'm doing, like collaborating with the developers and how it materializes shortly after doing it.
For sure, and we'll get into this in a bit towards the end of the show. But I'm with Kleros. I would say it's a really interesting project. Full disclosure, I don't know if it's relevant or not, but I invested in the ICO, and I think that it's not even that well known in the space, meaning that it's not on CoinMarketCap yet, and only a select group of people that are really into the Ethereum dApp ecosystem even know about it. So this is really cool to introduce it to the world, so to speak. And William, the way we're going to do this is, pretend you're explaining this to my mom or to my uncle, who's a mechanic, is not so tech savvy, but he understands, obviously he's intelligent. He understands dispute resolution. So we're going to do this thing in 3 stages. Starting out, talk a little bit about, because obviously if you're going to disrupt dispute resolution, you have to know the current limitations of it now. I mean, dispute resolution, right? Define that in layman's terms and tell us a little bit about how disputes are resolved today.
Yeah. So you might have a dispute anytime you have some kind of economic conflict, like 2 parties enter into some kind of business contract and then things don't go well. They have to somehow find some party to decide how to settle the contract between them. So that an attempt at an abstract definition. But for example, you might hire someone like a freelancer to build you something like a website or something. And then if you're unhappy with their work, that's the dispute. You want a refund, they don't want to give you a refund. How is that settled? So today, typically you would go to either small claims court for many disputes. You'll sue somebody and be like, give me my money back, and take them to the traditional court system. Or for other kinds of disputes, alternatively, you might say you buy something on Amazon or even eBay, where you're buying someone from some other individual somewhere who's not necessarily Amazon themselves. If you're unhappy with the product, it comes damaged, they never send it, you again might want your money back. So there you might go to a centralized dispute resolution platform that has been created by eBay or Amazon, where in order to handle the fact that some of their customers are unhappy, they have a team of people that review the cases. You'll send them evidence indicating that the product was damaged, and then eBay or Amazon will somehow decide, okay, sure, you get a refund. So basically, traditional dispute resolution either passes through the public justice system, the traditional courts, small claims courts, or it passes through some private platform which is centrally managed by a giant company like Amazon.
And William, I want to add a couple of things here. Sorry to interrupt, but you're doing a great job explaining it, right? So you have these centralized dispute resolution centers where each person kind of makes their case, right? You got the seller saying, hey, no, the customer's just trying to get a free whatever. And the customer responding, no, the product's not working. And then you're at the peril of them. One thing I wanted to mention, William, is that you mentioned small claims court, but suing people costs a lot of time and money. I realize small claims court can be a little bit less expensive, but still for $1,000, I've done plenty of web consulting in the past, man. And it's if someone owes me $1,000 or even $2,000, is it really worth it, my time and money, to go to small claims court? And usually it's not worth it. And I think also there's the risk of, I had a bigger case where there was fraud committed against our fruit company, and we couldn't really sue them because we know they don't really have that much money. So the amount of legal fees we would have spent wouldn't have made any sense. You can only really sue people that have a lot of money. So I just thought I'd add in that there's a lot of gaps right now in dispute resolution.
Yeah. So all of those are substantial limitations on small claims court. And then additionally, there's the added limitation that in our new, more globalized world, the person that you have a contract with may live in a different jurisdiction. So if you're freelancers on the other side of the world and you want to sue them, traditionally the contract that you create might indicate the jurisdiction you would sue them in. Maybe you have to sue them in, taking the small claims court in the jurisdiction where they are, potentially, depending on how your contract is created. So now, in addition to the normal headaches of trying to take someone to small claims court, you're trying to take them into small claims court in some country on the other side of the world where you don't live. So it's not, small claims court can be very useful in, some appropriate settings. There is recourse there for people, but it's often not practical for the kinds of small disputes that might occur in internet commerce.
That's a great point. And yeah, like you said, for example, let's just say I have a web design company out of Bulgaria and you're in Canada. You hire me, let's say it's $5,000 or even $10,000. And I don't deliver the work, in your opinion, right? And I don't do a very good job. The website's not working well. And you didn't get what was offered. I mean, are you going to fly to Bulgaria or get a lawyer in Bulgaria and take me to the Bulgarian court system, which you know nothing about, but probably is going to be slow and tedious, and just the learning curve, just learning how to sue someone in Bulgaria. I don't think it's that easy, right? It could take years. So there you go. There's my defense, and I can get away with not doing the services that were promised.
Yeah. So in practice, probably what I would do would be that I'd write an angry review on Yelp, and that would be the end of it. And you would get away and I would be out my $5,000.
Exactly. And so not really much recourse there. And so, okay, disputes can be resolved I'm trying to think where else there are disputes. There's disputes, I guess, in academia, right? In education, maybe it's between a professor and student, two students working on a project. Students could be accused of maybe plagiarism, writing a paper. Where else do we see dispute resolution? Some other examples.
Yeah, I mean, like academia, like instance, is not really economic because ultimately, it's not sort of sums of money that are coming into play. And when we get into like blockchain-based dispute resolution, it's important that like the kinds of penalties that can be inflicted upon people can be denominated in some kind of thing traded on a blockchain, which usually means monetary. So Kleros might not be the best adapted for resolving academia disputes. But really, anywhere there is commerce and anywhere that there is business dealings that like not go according to plan has these kinds of monetary disputes that can be appropriately put on a blockchain. You can even do like sort of non-fungible, non-monetary things to some degree. Like our joke example at Kleros is that if you have a couple that, is like a married couple and they have a divorce, there's the inevitable dispute of like who gets what. And if, for example, they owned a crypto kitty, then, who got the crypto kitty might be a point of contention, maybe. And because crypto kitties are non-fungible and, each one is unique, you can't split it in half, you can't clone another one. So you could settle that, for example, on a blockchain-based system.
So, William, that's really interesting. And okay, so divorce, right? And divorces can be very contentious. Sometimes there are kids involved, which is, not great for them. And I don't want to call it a movement, but I've heard that there's kind of this idea that people are starting to realize that, hey, maybe we should get divorced without lawyers. Easier said than done. Not all divorces end on amicable terms, and sometimes they're just, you need lawyers. I get that. That is interesting to think about, a dispute resolution system on blockchain for assets where I would guess a fraction of the legal fees could be decided using something like Kleros.
As long as the things that you're deciding can be like put on a blockchain somehow. Like deciding who gets the kids is not necessarily, that only works to the degree you can tokenize it. But
yeah,
no, this is not low-hanging fruit.
At least not in the alpha version of Kleros. We'll probably won't do kids on the blockchain. That's pretty funny, man. So let's go into kind of the use cases, how blockchain can disrupt. So if you want, you can like talk about like the types of situations. I just want to name one that I think is pretty interesting, wills, right? And I know there are some startups right now that are working on this, but if I can tokenize my assets, or even the simplest case, let's just say I have a bunch of Bitcoin and I want to leave that for my family. So I could maybe set up a smart contract, and listeners, smart contract is a contract on the blockchain where everyone has these passwords. So let's just say I have 5 kids, and if 3 of the 5 kids have their passwords, they enter into this smart contract, that begins the disbursement of my Bitcoin according to the agreement. But, perhaps there's a problem with the smart contract, or something has happened with the passwords. And then maybe if there was a connection to Kleros before, then Kleros can maybe come in and say, okay, 5 kids are going to use Kleros to finalize this and figure out how the funds will be distributed due to some of the issues that arose.
Yeah. For example, like you might not actually be dead and your kids are like conspiring against you by each entering their password. Like there are any number of disputes that could arise in a situation like that. And to the degree that you can foresee them and program them into a smart contract in advance, Kleros could totally be used to like rule on any given one of those disputes. So yeah, that's a completely reasonable example.
Okay, and I like that. And let's just take a step back here. William, you're obviously the expert here, but I do know enough, talking to like Hoshi and a lot of developers, that, smart contracts is an uncharted territory. So William, let's just say you and I are going to enter in some type of deal, right? Some type of business deal where you're going to pay me $100,000 based on a smart contract in 5 years. But we know, hey, we're still learning about smart contracts, right? There could be some type of unforeseen problems with the code that we don't see now. So let's make sure we have Kleros in there, knowing that putting 100% trust in a smart contract could be a bit dangerous.
Yeah. So like Kleros itself is a suite of smart contracts. But what, for example, you could do is if you have some extremely complicated smart contract that's like, oh, you don't entirely know how this is going to work, that could be a bug. What you might do is like early on in the code, allow a dispute that can be raised. It's like, I don't think the smart contract executed according to the vision, the whatever like idea of what we thought we were getting into when we created this, that didn't go correctly. So like you could raise a dispute that it's written into the ability to do that is written into the smart contract, but then like whatever else is in the smart contract could be overridden by a Kleros court. So that might give you like a sort of an out in the case of bugs and problems. It's still decentralized because in order to do that bypass, you need to be able to win your case in the Kleros court.
Okay, I think it's time to move into Kleros 101. But before we do that, I just want to summarize for listeners. So the current problems of dispute resolution, I'd say, problems/opportunities when it comes to commerce and when it can be on the blockchain is that jurisdiction is a big problem. You're not going to sue some guy in Kazakhstan. You're just not going to do it, right? Unless it's big money. You have to rely on centralized parties sometimes like eBay and Amazon. You're up to their whims and it can take time. It can be very costly if you do decide to enter a dispute resolution. So a lot of times you just don't want to do it. And then when it comes to blockchain, as we mentioned, smart contracts are relatively untested in the sense that there could be complications down the line, and it's having a dispute resolution service. It's blockchain based. It's nice to know that one of the biggest risks sometimes and you've seen this with whether it's hacks or smart contracts just not working the way they're supposed to do, is just having that recourse for a smart contract, just having that resource that you could have a dispute resolution jurors decide it for you. So, William, I think now is the time, man. Again, I just want to stress you're such a smart guy and you're working on really complex stuff, which we're going to link to some of the papers you've written and blog posts on Medium, which are fascinating stuff for those that want to really learn about this and go deep. It will be on podcast.bitcoin.com on the Blockchain 2025 part of the website. But William, let's start and explain this to my mom. We've learned a little bit about dispute resolutions, but tell us about Kleros.
Yeah, so the idea of Kleros is that we're a sort of blockchain-based crowdsourced dispute resolution. So there are two components there, the blockchain-based and the crowdsourced. So the crowdsourced idea is that when there's a dispute, some collection of jurors will be randomly selected to rule on that dispute. So like you get the wisdom of the crowd, basically deciding who is right on the dispute. So in order to become a juror, Kleros has a token called the Panakion. And the idea is that you deposit your Panakion token if you want to become a juror to resolve disputes. And then you choose a random token to determine who gets to rule on any given dispute. So like a dispute might start out small. It might start with a panel of 3 jurors, but there's like an appeal system. So if you're unhappy with your first ruling, you can appeal and get like progressively more and more jurors.
Okay, and William, sorry, I got to take a step back here. This is really good. We're going to continue with appeals in a second, but someone listening right now is thinking like, who are these jurors? Like, can anyone become a juror? Like, could my friend who maybe wants to make some extra cash or is interested in dispute resolution, is it really anyone that can become a juror?
A priori. So anyone that has these tokens can be selected to rule on a given case. But the thing is that they're incentivized. So there's like cryptoeconomics incentives put in place that try to encourage the jurors to be honest. Specifically, jurors are penalized for ruling incoherently from the other jurors at the end of any eventual appeals. If they don't pick what turned out to be the final answer, they get penalized. If they got the right answer, if they agreed with what the other majority of jurors said, then they get a reward. So like Kleros is based on an idea of Schelling points. So maybe I'll explain to your listeners what a Schelling point is.
For sure.
Before I go into sort of the general definition of what a Schelling point is, the Kleros idea is that if jurors are trying to be coherent, they're trying to be on the side that all the other jurors are on, then you might imagine that the average juror is more likely to be honest than not, just because honesty is a sort of distinguished choice. If I'm trying to pick, okay, I have all these different choices of how I can rule, and I don't know which one to pick, well, like honesty sort of sticks out. So even if you don't think that people are more like are like honest on average, which they may or may not be, at least like each person, whether that might be malicious, is thinking, okay, like I'm going to be honest because I think other people are going to be honest. So we're saying that honesty should be a Schelling point, where a Schelling point is this idea: if you have a bunch of people that don't communicate with each other, and you ask them how to come up with a sort of like a common answer to a question, they'll reason out like what everybody else should have said, what they think like sort of a distinguished choice will be that everyone will sort of gravitate to, and then they'll pick that. The classic example is if you have, say, several people that are in New York City and you tell them to meet, but they don't know when and they don't know where. And if, say this is before the age of smartphones, and they want to meet up, but they don't know when and where. And if they manage to meet up, they get some reward, whether that's the company of each other's presence or like a financial reward. And if they don't manage to meet up, well, then they don't win that reward. Then experiments show that people will disproportionately choose to meet up at noon at Grand Central Station. Just because like Grand Central Station is this idea of a meeting point. So when people think of abstract meeting point, they'll think of Grand Central Station. And then they imagine, okay, well, everybody else is also thinking like along these lines. So they'll also come up with Grand Central Station. So that's where I should go because they'll also gravitate towards the same idea. And then noon, because it's just sort of a distinguished time. Like a priori, there's no like noon wouldn't be better than like 3:57, but like 3:57 seems arbitrary, whereas noon seems distinguished. So if I want to pick a time that I think other people will also pick, I'll pick noon.
So it's based on Schelling points and really the honesty, I guess. You don't have to assume honesty on a case-by-case basis, but honesty as an incentive that if it's a simple dispute, I get rewarded financially, right? So the incentive's there to rule in the fairest manner possible, right? Because if Kleros isn't fair, then it's really not that valuable. And so I just want to go back to my question about who can be a juror. I guess I also wanted to see, like, I could be anyone, anywhere around the world. If I buy some of these PNK tokens, I buy them, I stake them, and, maybe I get a random case. It's a blockchain-based, decentralized work app, something like Upwork or Elance, but on the blockchain. And so maybe my first case is, I see this evidence presented. It seems clear that the contractor, the person who was hired to, let's say, design the website, didn't do their services. So I rule in favor of the person that contracted them, the person that paid for their services to get their money back. And then I would be rewarded some tokens for doing this. And so it's kind of like the jurors, I guess what I'm getting at is this could be a side source of income for people that are looking to make money, correct?
Yeah, totally. If you're looking for like a gig economy kind of gig, you want some side income and you're an expert on whatever kind of dispute, or at least like a relative expert, then you can do exactly that. We're going to have a system of subcourts. Like a priori, you could imagine, okay, well, I might on dispute one get like a good dispute on something I'm an expert on, something I'm familiar with. And then the next dispute I'll get some like very out there case that I don't know at all. So what we're doing is we're having subcourts where when disputes are created, they'll start at sort of a bottom of like a tree of subcourts. And at the top of that tree is the like a general court that conceivably can handle anything, but only if you appeal enough times to get there. But most disputes will be resolved at the layer of content-specific courts. So you'll have a court that handles internet commerce or even more specifically web design. So there'll be like a web design subcourt, and then maybe it will like go up to internet commerce, like court higher than that. And then like that would, if it's appealed enough, will go to the general court. And then somewhere else in the tree, there might be a dispute, like a court that handles like insurance claims related to weather or like forest fires or, natural disasters or something. Then like people who are experts in that, people will gravitate towards the subcourt that they're the best at because their ultimate goal is to be as coherent as often as possible. So if they deposit their tokens, their PNK in a subcourt that they're not an expert at, they are more likely to be like incoherent with the other jurors than if they picked a subcourt that they are knowledgeable in. Like even if they pick something they're not an expert at, they may be right by chance, but over the long term, statistically, they're probably going to be wrong more often than not. And eventually they'll be penalized, they'll lose tokens, and they'll drop out. Whereas if you pick a court that reflects your expertise, you'll be coherent often. And for one thing, it'll be easier for you to rule. You'll have to think less about the case and still have a high level of being coherent and getting rewarded.
That's so interesting. So while the jurors are randomly selected, it might be randomly selected within a subcourt.
Right.
Okay, if I'm an expert in web design, maybe because of my experience, I could be a great juror in that court, whereas it's something like making parts for airplanes on 3D printers and contracts there, something I don't know really anything about, then I probably wouldn't sign up to that subcourt.
Right.
But then you talk about I'll call it the Supreme Court, but the general court up top, they might just be like experts in dispute resolution. Maybe they've been judges before or they've ran big dispute resolution departments. So they'll be in the general court that will handle any of these subcourts. So even if they don't know the topics specifically, they have the methodology to help to get to the bottom of a very specific problem.
Well, the general court will sort of be everybody, all token holders that decide to deposit tokens, because it should be hardest to bribe the general court. Like ultimately, sort of, if you're an attacker trying to hijack the system, you need to buy enough PNK or bribe enough people to hijack the small courts. And like that will be easier for the attacker the fewer tokens are deposited in a given court. So by having the general court be everybody, like in order to like bribe the general court, you have to get half of the total votes, which generally reflects doing a 51% attack and like buying like half of the tokens or bribing like a very large number of people. So there's an economic protection there, and that it should be expensive to bribe the general court.
Wouldn't it be hard to get in touch with the jurors as well?
Yeah, I mean, like at least in the current version, that you can see their Ethereum address when it's selected. That doesn't necessarily mean that you can easily get in touch with them, but we have to imagine that the attacker might like post on Telegram or something. So like the system should be resistant, even if the attacker has some limited ability to try to like track down the jurors and individually bribe them.
Gotcha. And that's a good point. I mean, I think with all blockchain projects, right, you basically look at every worst case scenario, like how could this fail, and repeatedly go through those scenarios as a way to make the system stronger. Okay, so we have the different courts that you can join. You can become a juror. Now let's talk about the dApps, whether it's a prediction market app, a decentralized workforce app. So like we talked about earlier, like a decentralized Upwork or Elance for freelancers and people that are looking for hiring. So if they have this dApp, they basically need to integrate with Kleros and say, okay, we are integrated with Kleros, and when you set up these deals, you can choose a fee in the smart contract of PNK of your token ahead of time that will go to jurors.
So they use PNK to be selected as jurors, and their chance of being selected as a juror is dependent on how much PNK they deposit. So that's the role of PNK. And then their coherence, payouts, penalties are in PNK. But they can be paid really in anything. So for the moment, they're paid in Ether. So if you want to integrate with Kleros, so you don't really necessarily want to mess with PNK if you have your your external dApp that's trying to run a decentralized marketplace or a decentralized workforce. But you can create a contract that integrates with an arbitration standard that we've proposed that will specify Kleros as the arbiter, where your court case will be considered. And then the jurors will be paid a fee that's detailed in the contract that you create in Ether. Or if you wanted to pay them something else, depending on the policy. Subcourts can set different policies. So conceivably, you could have a subcourt that would want to be paid in something other than Ether, but a priori, they'll fix some fee in Ether that they are willing to hear your case for.
Okay, that's interesting. Now, is it possible, if I'm a PNK holder, to create a subcourt? I'm making this up here, but let's just say for dispute resolutions on a decentralized marketplace, right? And I think I have a better system, or there's one subcourt that's charging 3%. What if we charge 2%? Could I make a subcourt?
Yes.
Okay, so that's really interesting.
Yep.
So this is going to be a kind of a service for a lot of dApps as well. On one side, you have the people that can become jurors. Anyone can become jurors, and as a gig economy, earn money for resolving disputes. On the other hand, you have this blockchain-based system, but there's this really weak point, which is why Kleros came. What if people are having a problem and then they go to, quote unquote, just the current real world dispute resolution outside of blockchain? That can get really messy. And we mentioned the problem. So that's kind of where Kleros comes in.
Right. So if you're a decentralized marketplace, you certainly don't want to use a centralized solution like Amazon and eBay use, where you have some central authority that's resolving all of your disputes. But even if you're just a small company that can't invest in a giant dispute resolution service like eBay has, then it's still might be worthwhile for you to use us, because we'll offer sort of cheap, at least cheaper than buying a huge dispute resolution service, dispute resolution that you can trust to be independent and transparent because it's on a blockchain.
That's so interesting. Hey, William, I want to thank you so much for coming on. I got to admit, I was a little bit worried because you have some great technical papers, which I checked out. And I was like, man, I just hope William can break it down in layman's terms. But truly intelligent people are able to do that if you really know the subject. And you did a great job, man.
Thanks.
This is Jeffrey Tucker of the American Institute for Economic Research and the founder of the Atlanta Bitcoin Embassy. Make sure to listen to the Humans of Bitcoin podcast, part of the Bitcoin.com podcast network. Stories from people around the world whose lives have been changed by Bitcoin. New episodes every Tuesday.
I'm happy to come on.
Yeah. And for people listening, when will the mainnet of Kleros go live?
So we already have something on mainnet. We want to start small and start with disputes that are not super high stakes so that we can do tests and we can make sure that the platform works properly, that all the cryptoeconomic incentives that we've laid out actually behave as they're intended to. So we've started with a game. So the idea of the game is that we're creating a curated list of Doge images. So these Doges are these these memes of the Shiniwabu dogs. So the basic idea of a curated list is that I want to add something to the list, and then the implicit dispute, does that thing belong on the list or not? So for example, if a marketplace might have a curated list of products that satisfy the conditions of the marketplace. Like if you have a marketplace for toys, being on the list should require that you're a toy, and you shouldn't be able to add dangerous things to your marketplace of toys. And then the implicit dispute there that's being resolved, is this something that should be on the list or not? So for the Doge list, people are submitting images of Doges, and the implicit dispute, if someone decides to challenge and say, no, your image is not a Doge, you have two people on opposite sides of the dispute, one person saying, this is a Doge, and one person saying, no, this is not a Doge. So we've created a sort of a system of incentives to try to encourage people to do this. People who submit things that are successfully judged as Doges and get a certain number of Dogecoin. We bought some number of Dogecoin that's going to be split among all of the successful Doge images. And then we want people to attack the system so that we can see if, like a stress test, if it actually holds up. So we have rewards for the first 10 people who successfully submit a cat image. Like if you can submit an image of a cat, which does not also have a Doge in it, then the first 10 people who successfully do that, the first 10 images that successfully do that, get 2 Ether and a CryptoKitty. So we hope that will be enough to get people to attack the system. And so far, people have attacked the system to some degree, where they've put up images of cats that offer bribes to jurors, which so far have been rejected. And we ourselves are doing tests where we've created attacks that we've launched against our own system, sort of our best punch at our own system. And we're seeing how the jurors are behaving. That's still in progress. But this way, by having this sort of game version where the stakes aren't super high, we can test, look at juror behavior, and then it's already on mainnet, so the incentives are already real. But then going forward in a few months, we hope to start integrating with real decentralized projects that need dispute resolution. That'll be the next step.
So fascinating, man. Well, hey, man, William, best of luck. I can't wait to see how Kleros evolves moving forward.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the Bitcoin.com podcast network. To learn more about our shows, visit Bitcoin.com/podcast. Bitcoin.com podcast network.